What's going on, y'all? Happy holidays and welcome on in. In this video, let's go ahead and talk about the 5 most picked and oppressive units, as well as the best ways to counter them. I'll include stats, specific tips and tricks if the unit allows for it, as well as, of course, the best units you need to have ready. So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and start. We'll start with the least oppressive in my opinion, and that would be Fallen Cecilia. I say least oppressive, however, she is probably the most picked overall currently in real-time arena, so you need to be aware of what she does. And let's go ahead and highlight a few hard counters for her. The biggest hard counter, guys, actually I would say the only hard counter specifically to Fallen Cecilia would be Operator Cigarette. Operator Cigarette is meant to destroy barriers, and Fallen Cece is the queen of barriers, so it is naturally a 1-to-1 extreme matchup. Operator Cigarette not only will be able to destroy Fallen Cecilia's, Fallen CC will also apply barriers automatically to entire team, in which case Operator Cigarette can pick and choose any of those targets and get insane damage bonuses versus them. So Fallen Cecilia is actually a little bit of a liability when running her against Operator Cigarette. Another strong unit could be considered is Little Queen Charlotte, guys. Just be aware that LQC is not, I wouldn't consider a 1-to-1 counter because 1, we probably need to tack up, and 2, smart Fallen Cecilia players will have skill nullifiers or other ways to kind of interrupt that big bomb from LQC to go off. So the fact that we need multiple support units, or at least attack up, means LQC is a little bit harder to run. Another unit that we could consider would be Straws, who is of course a premier tank buster, and Fallen Cecilia is no exception. She will get cleaved down by well-built Strawses. Last but not least, guys, I would say units with unbuffable, so think Angel of Light Angelica, Briar Witch, Iceria, just to name a few. Anything that can debuff and really slap unbuffable on both Fallen Cecilia and her teammates will stop her #1 job, which is providing survivability through the use of barriers. All right, with that being said, let's go and move on to the next unit, guys, and that is the most ambitious mobile game of all time, Raid Shadow Legends, a free-to-play game that you guys need to be playing right now. Raid has over 600 champions, each with their own rich history and unique factions, so use my links below to download Raid yourself to your mobile phone or PC. Raid Shadow Legends is one of the biggest games in the world right now, and it's only getting bigger and better. Speaking of bigger and better, the newest boss just released is the Hydra. This thing has 6 heads, and each one is a boss all on its own. The Head of Suffering is the main tank that brings some horrible new debuffs, while the Head of Decay is all about tearing down and building up its allies. The Head of Wrath is a super angry damage dealer that weakens and provokes your team. The Head of Torment is terrifying, constantly applying true fear to your champions. The Head of Blight is all about poison, both offensively and defensively. And last but certainly not least is the Head of Mischief, who loves your buffs and wants them all for itself. Right now, Raid is giving away a super limited edition champion to every player in the game, esports legend and Navi superstar Simple. All you have to do is log in for 7 days between now and January 28th, and he's yours. If you miss the date though, guys, you miss out forever. So make sure you log in. With all that being said, guys, there's never been a better time to start playing. So hit the link in the description or scan my QR code and you'll get an epic champion Tayrel, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in-game. All this treasure can be found in your inbox right up here, and it's only available for 30 days for new players. And it's that easy. Just click the link in the description below, find me in-game under the name Car6, and thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring us. Let's get back to the video. Thanks, y'all, for being cool with those hashtag ads. They really help the channel out. But moving on to the next hero, let's go ahead and look at Belian. Real fast on the screen, guys, I have 2 different builds, counter and injury, and it's important to take note that any Belian you fight will most likely be on one or the other, and there are some slight differences in the ways you want to try and tackle them or bring units to fight against those Belians, okay? So take note, these are 2 pretty typical builds that I swap between as a Belian player myself. Alright guys, let's go in and lightning round all the Belian counters because there's a ton of them. The way she operates with her AoE means there's a ton of units that can punish her for that. So let's go through quickly down the list. First up, Last Rider Crow. Fairly obvious here. He provides mitigation in the form of barriers while also reducing the cooldown on his skill 3 mobile weapon Siegfried, meaning we're stacking up to 3 times max true damage AoE attacks on Last Rider Crow, and that puts a lot of pressure on the Belian player. We're also providing a ton of mitigation because he's a knight and of course the skill 2. After Last Rider Crowd, let's go ahead and look at the 2 ice unit counters that I think are best. First one being Rem, who will, every time Belian attacks, of course, guys, you know Rem's counter mode, the Iron Strike, has just so much team-wide pressure in the form of reducing buff durations as well as stacking healable. And then if anyone dies, if there's any squishies that are at risk of dying, that demon mode has a very, very, very urgent threat in just ending the game for the Belian player. The other one I would want to talk about is Seaside Bellona, who you can run on any different type of build, guys. Just make sure you prioritize a lot of damage, because we want to be putting pressure on the Belian player in the form of just high damage as well as those potential defense breaks. So maybe get a little bit of effectiveness too, but 0 speed, enough bulk to survive, and maximize your damage. You don't have to have lifesteal set. Just put on any broken set on Seaside Bellona, preferably with immunity if you can, and just let those skill 2s counters fly, and that also is very, very strong into Belian. Just be aware that unlike Rem, Seaside Bellona has some very hard counters. So if you're using this in real-time arena and your opponent picks up a Rowana or a Solitaria, for example, those are super hard counters to Bellona, which you will need to ban, or you're kind of just, you know, trading off immediate threats with the Belian player. After SSB, let's go ahead and look at General Purgus, who, of course, guys, nothing else needs to be said, but anytime Belian attacks, we get a big combat readiness push. So he's a natural answer, especially if you can fit in your team with the Bruiser style, as well as, like, you need an attack up. Another really strong counter is Rowana, and this one I want to talk about because this is very important between counter and injury set, guys. Versus a counter Belian, where she's going to be proccing just a ton of counters or a ton of skill 1 spam, no matter who you're hitting, because of Elbrus or counter set. Rowana will provide so much healing there that the Belian player will almost do no damage if the procs are happening. Now, if it's injury set, guys, Rowana will provide a lot of healing in the beginning where no damage is done, but every time that injury Belian hits your units, right, that injury is stacking, in which case it's going to become too much for Rowana to sustain once that injury takes over and your maximum health is just reduced too much. So be careful with Rowana versus injury set Belians. Overall, though, I think it is a nice pick, especially if you have nothing else on hand. There's a few other dark units, guys, like Martial Artist Ken, who I don't really recommend because of his difficulty in building, and then units like Straws, who I mentioned before, just really nice into tanky units. However, I think one we want to talk about that a lot of people underappreciate, me included, because I just don't really need him at the moment, but I have built him in the past, is Chaos Sect Axe. Axe God. He kind of got reworked, guys, to be a Little Queen Charlotte versus light units, so he will have a lot of bonus damage into light units, and I have seen this guy put in a ton of work in putting a lot of pressure into the Belian player. So if you need a budget option, I think he could be definitely worth it if you have a lot of issues with Belian. The last 2 are Thieves I want to talk about. Is Violet, who will counter every time, has a lot of damage. He's a threat on his own, so he's a strong pick in a lot of drafts, as long as you don't have opposing units like Zahak, like Milim, Charlotte on Symbol of Unity, you know, things that can avoid his major defense, which is dodging. And speaking of dodging, let's talk about Remnant Violet, who a lot of people, I think, can just consider Green Violet much better. Remnant Violet, I think, is very, very strong in Belian, guys. If you are lucky enough to have one, I know a lot of people may be upset because he just dies out of nowhere. Build him in a way like this, where you prioritize a lot of damage, have enough bulk where if he takes a random hit here and there, he could potentially survive. And you are putting on so much pressure on this Belian. Your damage is so high, you don't need a self-attack up because we get it from the skill 3. And every time the Belian misses on the Violet, which it won't happen all the time, and sometimes she will strip his evasion and you'll be so mad. But when things work as, you know, when we play the odds, we have 70% evasion after whatever artifact we want. And every time this stacks up to 5 stacks, we're getting a huge damage nuke into someone, as well as just providing so much pressure into the Belian. So don't underestimate the Remnant Violet in that regard. Alrighty, y'all, let's move on to the next unit, and let's keep this pace flowing because Belian had so many counters. And keep in mind, guys, I won't be able to cover every single counter out there, so if you guys have other ideas and things that you've been using to great effect against these powerful units, please leave them and help people out in the comments below. But next up, we got Rimuru, the Slime. Rimuru is a unit, guys, that you need to be aware of and how to try and do your best to fight him. It's going to be difficult because he has so much in his kit. He copies so many buffs, and on top of that, he has a elemental advantaged skill 3, which has a potential to do a 10,000 fixed on top of that, meaning he'll just one-shot units. If it doesn't, he's putting defense break on a lot of other targets on your squad. And then the skill 2, you just got to be aware of because it also hits really hard, gives him a CR push, and it's kind of unpredictable unless you really have a lot of experience fighting him. So in general, Rimuru is just an absolute terror. He's a headache to fight, but we do have a few options here, guys. The main one being if you have access to unbuffable style units. So just like we talked about with Fallen Cecilia, if you have access to units like Angel of Light Angelica, who is really good, obviously, boy, she's probably, we need to talk about her as well as one of the most oppressive units, which I think we'll get to. But the unable to be buffed obviously will stop Rimuru from copying buffs for his squad, which is huge. It won't give him the access to the big 10,000 fixed damage, as well as the silence, which will just stop him from doing anything from that point. And Rimuru, typically, if you stop his early momentum, he can be dealt with afterwards. Other units besides AOL, we could look at units like Bride Witch Iceria, which I do not have, but I'll put a picture on the screen. Bazaar, who is pretty easily accessible for a lot of players. And then Fairy Tail Tenebria, who is risky, but we do want to mention her because if she does happen to hit Rimuru, it's nice, as well as she's putting unbuffable on the rest of the squad, as well as locking them down. So if you have that, she is on the banner right now. We could kind of use her. Just be careful because of the elemental disadvantage from Fairy Tail's side. Now, on top of that, we have things like, I want to mention Carrot, who I think is a strong counter to Rimuru. Mine is not built at the moment. I had this for PvE, so, you know, the typical Carrot builds. Instead, though, guys, I would recommend if you want to bring a Carrot to fight Rimuru's, make sure she's a lot tankier, because what could happen is Rimuru, with his elemental advantaged skill 3, he sometimes can just straight up pop carrots in a one-shot nuke, so you need to have enough bulk for her to survive. However, she does survive. A lot of times the Rimuru will be countering into her, providing a lot of burns, and Carrot usually will win the trade-off and just nuke down the Rimuru. Just be careful, it's not a direct one-to-one, and smart players can sort of get around it depending on speed tuning. But for the most part, if your Carrot is tanky, I consider that a decent counter, especially since everyone has Carrot available. Now, last but not least, guys, in my opinion, when we're fighting against Rimuru, a lot of times the option is really just out-tank it, okay? So with Rimuru, as long as he's not skill 3ing, which reduces the cooldown on that powerful skill 3 nuke, if we can kind of just either bait out the skill 2 with the use of units like Fallen Cecilia, or just anyone that's tanky enough, depending on speed tuning, we just survive the skill 2 that'll boost him up, and then he'll have to choose a skill 3 target. And hopefully we brought units like Landy, who we're going to talk about here in a second, or our DPS is units like Spectre Tenebria, which he cannot target, in which case he'll be forced to nuke into a tankier unit, which he'll gas himself out, and then afterwards you can sort of take him out because he'll just be spamming skill 1s, which is not really that great. Now, I want to talk about Landy real fast because I think this is a strong Rimuru counter, but you got to be a little bit careful. So Landy will, if she attacks into Rimuru, she's the first one on your squad attacking, she will proc his skill 2, Analyze and Assess. He'll steal the buffs that provided, like the speed up. However, all those buffs is kind of good for Landy, guys, especially if you have 20 souls. There's a cool combo you can do. You give the Rimuru an option to steal, or you force him to steal all your buffs, and then if you have enough, if things go as planned and he has so many buffs for his squad, a lot of times, guys, you'll get not only just one fully loaded full burst, but 2 in a row if you soul burn, right? So we do one full loaded full burst, and then we soul burn, we take the hit, Rimuru copies the buffs, and when we do another one, a lot of times he will give so many buffs that it'll allow Landy to get her full back-to-back skill 3s fully charged, and that will usually end the match for the most part. Just be careful in using it, guys, because like I said, Rimuru will hit her, and if Landy does not proc Guiding Light, or if you don't have Guiding Light period, he can follow up after the CR push and nuke her down with his skill 3. Overall, though, guys, there's a reason Rimuru is one of the strongest units. He's very, very difficult. If you want to bring units like Amelia, Maid, Chloe, there's one option, guys. It's not really a hard counter, but this is go under tips and tricks. Sometimes don't just do not use skill 3 early. Hold it on Maid Chloe, hold it on your Amelia, for example, and try to bait it out first with a different unit, and then in the follow-up turns, once Rimuru is kind of handled or mitigated, then we start using our dangerous, skills. So just be careful, guys, in providing buffs and then hitting him. You kind of got to learn the mechanics, but overall, he's a difficult unit, but hopefully that helps out a little bit. Okay, guys, moving on. Let's talk about the unit that I keep referencing, Angel of Light Angelica, who is just probably one of the biggest headache units on this list. I know a lot of y'all have issues with her. And let me just start by saying this, guys. If you're playing RTA, one option and a very viable option is to just pre-ban her. I know that that won't be our only fix, but just understand that a lot of players in RTA at the higher levels will just pre-ban her and not worry about it, okay? Especially if you don't like or don't own her yourself. But that being said, let's say you don't want to just pre-ban her. Let's talk about a few different options, and the main thing is bringing a cleanser. The premier cleanser, guys, would be Mediator Kawerk, ML Kawerk, who I don't have access to, so I'll put a picture on the screen or maybe some footage of, you know, RTA matches where I've seen him. But he's just the premier unit that doesn't need effect resist because of the way his passives work. He's just so strong at the moment. If you have access to him, I don't think you need to be worrying about almost any debuffer as long as, you know, he's not getting banned out. Now, past ML Kawerk, though, let's talk about a few other options. And don't worry, I won't list only Moonlight 5 stars, but Maid Chloe is one, guys, if you have access to. A lot of players are shifting to a high ER build for to fight against units like AOL or Fairytale Tenebria, in which case, because of the 20% passive, bonus points if you have any imprints, but her big cleanse on top of the fact that we can now stack things like Bastion of Hope, in which case this gives me like 52.5% before getting hit, on top of her 20% passive, leaving us at around like 285% here. Ideally, I like to be like 300 because if you guys saw my AOL, I'm sitting at 200%, and I think most AOLs will be around here, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, but at 300% effect resist, my Maid Chloe should be sitting comfortably against most debuffers. Now, let's say you don't have Maid Chloe. Another option, free-to-play wise, would be Angelica Mount Morte. I think this is huge, guys, for a lot of y'all that are maybe newer and already fighting AOLs in Arena, Guild Wars, early RTA, whatever it is. Momo comes with so much free ER through her Awakening Tree passive that you can just stack as much ER gear as you want, and maybe even if you need extra, put on a Shamadra Staff or the Bastion of Hope if it's not on anyone else for extra ER. Eventually, though, at higher levels of play, Momo is susceptible to just getting out damage in terms of like tempo, in which case she can sustain her team. But if we're using her mostly as a cleanser, she does really, really well and is a super good free-to-play option. So besides cleansing against Angel of Light Angelica, another very, very strong tactic is to use a lot of skill 1 spam units that don't necessarily need buffs and using that to fight her. The premier one, of course, guys, is Apoc Ravi, but I'll mention a few non-Moonlight units hopefully here. Apoc Ravi, skill 1, right? We get silence, we get unbuffable, but Apoc Ravi doesn't care a single bit. We just spam those skill 1s to the AOL, and we try to take her out as quickly as possible because most of them aren't super tanky. In combination, if we have a unit like Lilius, who is a very, very nice combo with Apoc, but she can also be used with anyone that fits that category of a strong skill 1 that doesn't need buffs. Lilius, we don't need a high ER cleanse to... We don't need a high effect resist Lilies to cleanse. All we care about is spamming skill 1s and hopefully pulling those strong skill 1 units like Apoc Ravi. Other units I've mentioned could be Spectre Tenebria, Fire Ravi, Little Queen Charlotte, things like that. Just whatever has a strong skill 1 that doesn't need buffs. You spam those into Angel of Light Angelica while she silences your team, and you're putting so much pressure on her. Most of them aren't tanky. You can usually take her out and then sustain from there. If the Lilius does 15% resist, then of course you can just cleanse, but she is a nice combo against AOL players. Last but not least, guys, we have units like Politis, who I wouldn't really say is a hard counter to AOL, but you know, you will have some trade-offs with Astral Guide into the Angelica, where either you're taking away her skill nullifier or you're proccing this and pushing up. But the main thing I think with Politis is the fact that she has those combos as well as having access to Tagahel's book. A nice thing you can do with Politis is use the souls if you have an extra turn to get out of Angel of Light Angelica's silence, which is only 1 turn, and then you can lead into a skill 3. Or if you have a cleanser like Maid Chloe, who I mentioned earlier, and you're not on high effect resist, you can use those souls from Politis or whatever book you might have access to and use the extra turn to cycle out of the silence and then lead into the big cleanse. All right, since it's only 1 turn silence, we can do cool combos like that. Okay, guys, let's move on to our last unit of the video, and that is Apoc Ravi, who has been mentioned a few times throughout for good reason. She's considered the premier bruiser, premier unit, honestly, guys, at this point. She does everything. She has very, very few weaknesses, can be used in almost all types of builds. You already know my spiel on her, but she does have a few counters. They're just not a lot, and that's why she is one of the top units. The main unit to counter Apoc Ravi, unfortunately, guys, is a Moonlight 5-star, and that is Little Queen Charlotte. I'll show you guys my build right here. LQC was also mentioned in a few other counters for other units, but her main use, I think right now, guys, is stopping Apoc Ravi. Now, my gear here is not the best, but I like bomb builds like this, and I think this is the best build if we're usually using this as a anti-dark unit, anti-Apoc Ravi unit in general. We want to make sure we have a lot of damage, guys, as close to 4K attack and 300 crit damage. Now, of course, if you can't hit that, especially on penetration set, it's okay, but I do like the pen set, immunity, and crit set option for her. It gives us the bulk, as well as the immunity and just the all-rounder stats. I really like Hellcutter too because it allows us to build slow as well as lower our crit chance leaving room for the other stat lines. Just make sure you have enough damage, not just attack, guys, because we're not focused on just the splash bonus damage from the skill 3. We really want high crit damage too, because we really need to knock out that Apoc Ravi early. So moving past Little Queen Charlotte, guys, we have units that can stay out of reach of Apocalypse Ravi. Since she is only single target, we have units like Landy, who can just, with Guiding Light, stay out of Apocalypse Ravi's massive damage range and just nuke down from the safety of Guiding Light. Now, if you don't proc the Guiding Light, your Landy could be a sitting duck. However, we have a better unit for the job, and that would be Spectre Tenebria, who has permanent stealth and just has so much pressure. She's a very strong unit, and bonus points if the opponent is on counter Ravi. We don't care about that either. Spectre Tenebria is just a very good option. Look for her if you hopefully picked her up from connections fighting Apocalypse Ravis. But after these two, last but not least, I think this is the only other unit we could really consider a counter to Apocalypse Ravi, guys. Keep in mind, even though I am kind of making it seem like there's very few counters to her, Apocalypse Ravi is a super strong unit. She does have revive. She can turn around matches. But for the most part, a lot of times if you just draft in a way where we kind of just acknowledge that Apoc Ravi is too strong at the moment, overtuned, and we focus on the rest of the draft, we can still win. So don't think like it's all doom and gloom. But if we have access to Spirit Eye Celine, she will win a 1v1 against Apoc Ravi every day of the week. Now, we do have to be aware that the Apocalypse Ravi players will usually have other answers alongside the Ravi to deal with Spirit Eye Celine, because Spirit Eye Celine does win the 1v1. But if we can ignore those, like if we can avoid the strips, unbuffables, and things like that, Spirit Eye Celine can close out a match or will be a must ban for the Apoc Ravi player. You can build her like this, or you can build her on Lifesteal. I think those are the two best builds at the moment. With that being said, guys, let's wrap it up there. We covered 5 of the most impressive units. There's other units that I want to talk about, like ML Kowarik, Mediator Kowarik, Rem, Violet, but I want to just pick maybe the 5 most commonly talked about or the strongest at the moment. But since the video is so long already, we'll save that for another time. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out, everybody.